Awesome. So I see some new folks. So my name's Tan from Sabil. I'm a project coordinator at Sabil. Thank you for joining us for the latest Kumi Now online gathering. If you're new here, I did put a few links for our website and our YouTube where we put most of our recordings. And today's topic will be on gender-based violence. We're joined today by Ubay from Bisan Center for Research and Development, which is based in Ramallah. The first part of our meeting will be dedicated to our guests, but please stay around after he leaves, as we will be dedicating the rest of the hour turning our knowledge into action as we engage in advocacy. Before I start, just like to remind you that the session is being recorded, but we will have a Q&A session, so make sure to put any questions that you have for Ubay in the chat, and once he finishes his presentation, I'll make sure to ask those questions. And let me just introduce Ubay, and then he can begin his presentation about the work of Bisan Center and the current research and everything that he's doing. So Ubay Al-Abudi is the Executive Director of Bisan Center for Research and Development and is a researcher in the field of socio-economic rights. He is also the editor-in-chief of El Taqadumi, which is the progressive in Arabic. I think I pronounced it wrong, so I apologize. But it's a peer-reviewed journal on development in Arabic. And he can talk a little bit more about Bisan Center, but the Bisan Center is a non-governmental, nonprofit, progressive Palestinian civil society organization that seeks to enhance Palestinians' resilience. They do a lot of research and they contribute to a Palestinian civil, democratic, and active community. So, Ubay, whenever you're ready, you may start.
Thank you. And thank you for Sabil and Kumi for hosting us on this one. Good evening, everyone. I would like to talk about gender-based violence in occupied Palestinian territories, which include the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza. As you all well know, Palestinians have been subjected to various forms of violence, but Palestinian women have been subjected to, I would say, several layers of this violence. Palestinian women have to endure for not only being oppressed by a colonial regime that dehumanizes them, murders them en masse with their families and their children, like what's happening in Gaza right now, but also with a patriarchal society that views women in general as second class citizens and does not give the same rights to women as it gives to men. In the Palestinian context, we did a massive research on gender based violence in the Palestinian territories under colonial terms. And we found out actually this research was done with extensive interviews, including 28 focus groups, 14 interviews with women from various governorates, including women from East Jerusalem, and of course, interviews with women from Gaza. We have actually and this research was actually finalized before October 7th. So did not include the other forms of violence against women after October 7th. The forms of violence that were experienced by women include violence at the checkpoint, gender-based violence at the checkpoint, that included sexual harassment and, in certain instances, even reached rape. Violence while women were being arrested and detained by Israeli forces. Violence while women were protesting in the Palestinian streets against for political rights, calling for general elections and the respect of freedoms, as what happened with the demonstrations and women activists when they went in the streets after the killing of the activist Nizar Banat, and also violence at home, in the school, on the street. These forms of violence are enabled and, I would say, exasperated by Israeli occupation practices that include, for example, closing checkpoints and making sure that women and men are crowded together in confined spaces. So the violence is enabled. This is also enabled by soldiers at checkpoints. Especially, we found out that this was prominent before October 7th and the Hebron checkpoint. In the Hebron Old City, there's a segregation between the residents of the old city and the settlers that occupy the houses and lands there. And these settlers actually practice various forms of violence, including using sexual violence and gender based violence against women and against households there in order as a tool to drive people out of their lands. We have documented cases with Bedouin communities that are very conservative where at 2 and 3 a.m., young teenage settlers armed would break into the women's quarters of the tent, which is segregated from the men's sleeping quarters, and try to remove the blankets and sheets that are covering them or are entering with uh, cameras on in order to blackmail and put pressure on the families there because according to Palestinian Islamic culture, a woman is veiled and is not supposed to show her hair to anyone other than her close family members, including her brothers, husband, father, son. So this is basically who she is allowed to show her hair to. So these are used all as part of the colonial practices to try to drive Palestinian families out of their homes, out of their lands. We have documented cases in Hebron where women, farmers, olive pickers, who used to make a living uh, from picking the leaves of grapes in order to do the famous Palestinian dish of the wali, where you put fig leaves and you wrap fig leaves around rice and meat and you cook it in the oven. Women used to make substantial income during the summer period from picking up these leaves. They were targeted, they were assaulted, they were harassed, and the nature of the assaults by Israeli settlers, it was sexualized. And in order to deter women from going to these lands that the settlers wanted to confiscate and wanted to take, to deprive the people of their ownership of these lands. When we're saying that there's gender based violence in the Palestinian context, the colonial context, there are similar actually experiences from women of color in a country like the United States, where a militarized police force, in our case, the Israeli police and the Israeli army, also use threats of sexual violence and sexual violence against women detainees in order to force them to confess to charges that they are accused of, in order to extort and blackmail their relatives. There have been cases in this context where a male that has been accused of various violations of Israeli laws, they brought in female relatives of his in order and threatened him with raping these female relatives. They didn't carry that out, but they threatened him to rape them if he did not confess to the charges that he was being accused of. These kinds of practices, how unfortunate and how extreme we say they are unfortunately also well documented and well practiced. The sexual violence went into a hyper action after October 7th. All of the forms that we have identified before October 7th were exasperated and were used to the extreme after October 7th. There have been cases documented by the UN after October 7th in Gaza and the West Bank of women, Palestinian women being raped, where rape of women is seen as a tool to humiliate the Palestinian community, especially their male relatives. And this has actually been used as a tool by Israelis and being sometimes even uh, shown about. For example, you can see it in the videos where they paraded men and women, not all of them dressed or well dressed. They would be half naked or stuff like that, being arrested in mass, detained, put in holes in the ground that were dug by the being put close to each other. So all of these practices were actually documented, and some of them we have videos of it, unfortunately, because Israeli soldiers shared these videos. We've seen this hypersexualization and trying to, I would say, humiliate the Palestinian community and recently the Lebanese community when the Israeli soldiers go into homes and they parade themselves, photograph themselves with women's lingerie in order to send messages that we are violating your lives. This has been too systematic, actually, to be a coincidence, and we haven't seen a single case of an Israeli soldier being punished for these practices. The most extreme case was the rape of a Palestinian male detainee who was raped to death in Sderot Yemen prison. This rape, actually, the footage of it was smuggled by one of the Israelis to the press, and this footage was shown on public media. The soldiers that committed this heinous act of raping someone to death were only detained for a couple of days, then released, and until now, they are free and they are being treated as heroes in the Israeli public eye. Most of the Israeli society is not even is not I would not even say that they tolerate this, but they feel that this is part and parcel of the battle that's being waged by their community against Palestinians, and they feel that they need to prove that if you ever jeopardize or harm a Jew, then the entire community will pay a price for it. When we say that the entire community will pay a price for it, we are seeing this in the mass killing, what has been described also as genocide taking place in Gaza, but not only in Gaza, the wide destruction of infrastructure, the easy trigger hands in the West Bank, the shooting of families, the destruction of property, and the humiliation, the daily humiliation of Palestinian families that are traversing on Israeli roadblocks that are separating Palestinian towns and cities and villages from each other. Today, there are over 750 Israeli roadblocks across the West Bank, and these roadblocks are actually preventing Palestinians from even communicating together or meeting each other. Uh, uh, And of course, I see a question right now of this is evidence is passed to the ICJ and the ICC. Yes, of course, we have human rights organizations that have widely documented this. We have testimonies from survivors of sexual violence that have also given their testimonies under oath. And we have actually the footage that was shot by the Israeli soldiers themselves and uploaded to social media. So these kinds of practices are well known. These kind of practices are widespread, and Palestinian human rights organizations have documented these cases and passed them on to the ICC and the ICJ. When we are saying that these cases are well documented, we are seeing also a lack of accountability from the Israeli government, from the Israeli people in charge, whether it was in the Israeli army or it was the Israeli General Prosecutor's Office. We aren't seeing cases being systematically tried against people committing acts of violence or gender based violence against Palestinians. We aren't seeing that acts of dehumanization, of sexual violence, of harassment that are being punished by the Israeli army or Israeli commanders. We aren't seeing that these practices are waning down. What we are seeing is that these practices are surely, but are slowly and surely, are being implemented as the mainstream practice of the Israeli army. The idea behind these practices, according to our understanding as an organization, is to humiliate and break the spirit of the Palestinian people so that they would think that any act of resistance, any act against the occupation, however legal or illegal this act would be, however it would be coinciding, non-violent or violent, would be met with massive repression, and the repercussions would be so severe that people wouldn't be able to stand up against this. We have had international journalists that have reported being sexually assaulted by Israeli soldiers while being around Gaza or trying to photograph aid trucks going to Gaza. Um, One of the cases got actually quite a lot of coverage recently in the last few weeks because she was a reporter for the Daily Beast. And actually, these actions and what's happening to Palestinians isn't only being documented by Palestinian human rights organizations, even the UN have talked frankly that these cases were documented. Although these cases are documented, are severe, we are seeing, unfortunately, very little rhetoric from the UN Special Rapporteur on Prevention of Sexual Violence during conflict, who actually, and uh, this evidence that we are talking about is so well documented now and so widespread that there's no actually question that these actions have happened, but we have seen very little consequences for these actions. Even the use of gender based violence against male detainees during interrogation as a means of interrogation and torture, this has been also so widely documented after October 7th, being happening in Israeli prisons and Israeli, we would say, concentration camps these days, because these camps serve as a concentration camp. I just actually today received a memo from the Israeli Committee Against Torture, which talked about how the Israeli laws and practices that were changed and regulations that were changed after October 7th, how these facilitated the widespread abuse, torture, and gender based violence against Palestinian men and women that were detained, especially from Gaza, but also not limited to Gaza, also from the West Bank. In this sense, we also saw that, for example, the situation of women detainees has deteriorated rapidly. We are seeing that women detainees, Palestinian detainees, who most of them are under administrative detention, which is being detained without a charge, are being held up uh, in subhuman conditions. This is the least we could say about it. They are subjected to verbal abuse, including threats of rape, threats of sexual assault, and are being sometimes reporting also harassment, sexual harassment, and assault. And in certain cases, there are reports of rape of Palestinian female detainees. Palestinian women, actually, while in prison, also report that they are not receiving their pads. For example, when their period comes, they are not receiving the medical attention that they need. And all of these practices are sanctioned and covered up, unfortunately, also by the Israeli judicial system, because the Israeli judicial system and the public prosecutor are not pressing charges against prison guards, officers, army guards of uh, that have participated or committed these kinds of acts against Palestinians. I would stop here for after 20 minutes and would open up the space for further questions. Already answered one, and I'm ready to answer more.
Thank you so much for your presentation and sharing updates with us. If anyone has questions, please put it in the chat and I will make sure to convey it. In the meantime, I did want to ask, in terms of after October, how difficult has it been in terms of doing research and field work, as well as covering and keeping track of like women in prisons? Has it been difficult to do? And how do you like find updates about them?
Well, for women in prisons, there are specialized Palestinian organizations like Ad-Damir that go and visit, and the Prisoners Affairs Center. What we do is we take the data, the primary data that they collected, and use it in our research. For the field work, we are actually relying, we have trained a large number of field workers across the West Bank and Gaza. So we rely a lot on them on a research basis. Whenever there's a research topic, we reach out to them and we contact them. Women from the same community, it's easier for them to report on these issues. Researchers that are from the same government, it's easier for them to get information from the government because travel between governorates is very difficult at these moments.
And does Basan also do research in terms of like women who have like Palestinian women who have Israeli citizenship? Has there been like a difference in terms of the gender-based violence there?
Well, we actually haven't done that comparison yet, but there are very good organizations that are doing this kind of work. One coalition would be Coalition Fada, which is coalition of women's or rights organizations, Palestinian women's rights organizations that are working in Israel. And this coalition has, I think, extensive reports on how Palestinians with Israeli citizenship are treated like second or third class citizens, and with the experience of Palestinian women in that regard.
I see some questions here. The first one is the situation for schools. How do settlers and army act against students and staff?
Well, the Gaza Strip, there is no schools left. The schools have all been turned into shelters, and a lot of these schools, about 80% of them, have been damaged or destroyed. In the West Bank, the schools in areas close to settlements and in areas, even actually even inside cities these days, because the Israeli army is coming on a daily basis, have been disrupted so much. You would be sitting in class, for example, students in the middle of a city like Ramallah, and the Israeli army would decide to do a military operation inside the city, fire tear gas, disregarding the safety of the pupils and their teachers, and this would cause panic among the students and would also disrupt classes. We've seen actually Israeli settlers attack Bedouin communities, destroy with the help of the Israeli army schools, several schools that were serving Bedouin children in order to drive these families off their lands.
Thank you for the response. I think another question is about the Red Cross or Red Crescent. Do you know if there's any observers within prisons or allowed to be in prisons?
Well, the Red Cross and the Red Crescent aren't allowed to access prisons, Israeli prisons. So Palestinians are basically cut off from the world. They have irregular lawyer visits, and these lawyer visits are too few and too separate apart and are done under the observation of Israeli prison guards and the prison systems. So, and Palestinians who have spoken up have faced beatings, have faced assaults. So Palestinians, while being in prisons, a lot of them are afraid to speak up. But we are also getting testimonies from prisons, from prisoners that were released about. And actually, I would also want to stop using the word prisoners, calling Palestinians being detained by Israelis. I would say that they are hostages because basically we have zero rights in this regard. Palestinians that were taken by the Israeli army have been starved, have been beaten, sexually assaulted, with zero repercussion for all of those human rights violations, and are being kept, most of them, incommunicado, that is, under administrative detention without any charge. So, and this is not limited to a period, this can go on for indefinite periods, 6 months at a time, each order, and they can keep you as long as they want.
Yeah, thank you for the correction on that. I think it's important to make sure we use the right terminology, especially in the case of like being like administrative detention, and now there's like a lot of kidnapping campaigns as well throughout the West Bank. Another question someone asked also if Basan has done any reporting on violence maybe by the Palestinian Authority in terms of gender-based violence. Has there been
Yes, of
anything
course.
in those
Yeah,
cases?
of course. I reported on this while I was speaking, that especially women that were political activists have faced severe repercussions. We have done a report back in 2022 under the title Shrinking Space for Women's Activists. And the second part of the report was dedicated to testimonies from women who survived sexual assault by Palestinian security forces while demonstrating, calling for general elections and for the respect of freedoms.
Are there any current active women movements that are still doing work right now?
Yes, we have active women's movements across the West Bank and Gaza, including East Jerusalem, but they are facing severe repression, like the Union of Palestinian Women's Committees. They have been all arrested by the Israeli forces and put under administrative detention. So we have, I would say, women's organizations, also civil society organizations that are protecting and working to call out acts of violence against women, call out discrimination against women, and these actually, I can give some examples like Wikilac, Women's Working Society for Development, women's rural development. So we have a strong history of civil society in Palestine. And actually, the oldest Palestinian organization was the Young Women's Christian Organization. This is the oldest Palestinian NGO. It was established back under the Ottoman period in 1895 and still operational until today in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. So um, Palestinian women, yes, have organized for a long time.
Thank you for that. Someone also asked what supports are there for those who have suffered trauma, including sexual violence, and their families once they're released.
Well, unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority has very little resources. So most of the support is done on program basis with Palestinian human rights organizations like Ad-Damir, the Independent Commission for Human Rights, the Survivors of Torture Center. So these are examples of organizations that are offering Wikilac, also another organization, offering counseling, offering lawyer help, offering also some financial support for the women. But of course, the main issue that we face, because we are Palestinians, there is zero accountability for any violation that is committed against us. And this gives the sense for the perpetrators that they have a sense of impunity so they can repeat their crime again and again.
And then in terms of the current campaigns, are there any campaigns where international audiences, like the people in this room, can do to support Basan's work, and then also just in terms of gender-based violence?
Well, for Bisan's work, we also opened up an office in Brussels called Bisan International, and we encourage people to interact. We are also doing the online lecture series. It was last Wednesday, last week, we hosted the Dear Fasin on the consensus of the genocide on Gaza, why the moral abdication of Gaza. I think this is a very important lecture and information that can be spread around. I would suggest that also people can join other campaigns that we are supporting, like No Fuel for Genocide. This is a major campaign that we are working. And if people are also part in the US and Europe, they can write to their politicians, make them aware of what's happening, make them know that they care about these issues. Especially, I would say that the new administration, the new US administration has a lot of people saying that they are doing God's bidding, but God never sent people to oppress other people or to rape other people or to assault other people. This is not God's work.
I just put the link to Basan's website. I think you'll be able to access the lecture series, right, that you mentioned,
Yeah,
on your website. So there's that, and then I think there might be a donation link as well on the website. So if anyone wants to just visit this and explore Basan's work. And I don't see any other questions. Feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask anything. So I'll wait a little bit and
I
see.
saw one question saying, have any prison guards become
Mhm.
whistleblowers? Yes. Actually, most of the information we are getting, and this is leaking to what they call it, investigative reporting into Haaretz, for example, or the Intercept, is through Israeli soldiers, Israeli what do you call it, officers that have broken rank and and blown the whistle of what's happening. Unfortunately, there aren't many, but sometimes it's only enough to have one to know what's happening.
Well, thank you for that. And then another question, I guess, is about maybe updates on settler violence. Like, how bad has the settler violence been in the West Bank?
It's it's the worst. We are having pogroms daily. 2 weeks ago, they assaulted the Al Bira, which is like the major metropolitan city in the West Bank and the headquarters of the Palestinian Authority. They burned 20 cars, two apartments, and only when they were confronted by the people that they withdrew. No arrests have been made against these violent settlers, and settlers are armed. Today, there are over 90,000 armed settlers, a lot of them with US made weapons that have been provided to Israel through the United States. And these actually are not just individual settlers, they have their own militias at this moment, paramilitary militias that organize in attacking Palestinian villages, homes, cities, etc.
And I think this is a similar question from earlier about support. So let me
Look, the same
see.
organizations that we talked about both work on victims' basis. They do not care who the perpetrator is. So the same organizations that I named, Wikilac, Al-Damir, the Independent Commission for Human Rights, support women victims of gender-based violence, whether they were the perpetrator was an Israeli or a Palestinian.
Let's see if there's any more questions. Yeah, but before you go, is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience regarding this
Well,
topic or anything else?
I would request that every one of you treats themselves as a VIP for Palestine. A VIP would visit Palestine, inform people about Palestine, and also push for a change in policy, a change for um, in the practices of the country that they're coming from, because the crimes that are being committed here are enabled by the complicity of Western governments, unfortunately. Not all governments are complicit to the same degree, but also all governments have actions that they can take. We have seen Spain, for example, banning the transfer of weapons to Israel, banning weapons ships to land at its ports. Unfortunately, Morocco did not do the same. So we guess that if enough people stand up, we will see a change in this policy. In the end, we are all human beings, and one human life is worth as much as the other.
Thank you, Obai, for this powerful presentation. I think hopefully the facts and the stories that you provided will um, motivate everyone in this call to continue advocating. Um, and in terms of answering the question about how accessible it is for
We
delegations to
have
get,
currently a delegation from
yeah,
Sabil,
yeah,
and we're
exactly.
going to
So
meet them on Thursday. I will meet them on Thursday, 60
great.
people.
Yeah, so Sabil has been doing a lot of delegations, and so we've been meeting with groups like Basan, and other civil society organizations that are doing important work, during the situation. So, certainly you can reach out to Sabil and other groups, that are still hosting, if you are wanting to go and visit. So now in terms of since there's no more questions, we'll probably turn now to the action portion. So Ubai, if you have time, you feel free to stay, but if you need to go, you can feel free to leave. And we thank you for your powerful presentation and for sharing with us.
Thank you. I have to go. Sorry for that. I have to take care of my kids. Bye bye.
So thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so yeah, there's a delegation in December, so great to hear that Mary Ann will be going. I do want to share some actions, and then we can also open it up in terms of any other updates. I know last week we had a speaker from DCI Palestine, and this November 20th, which is tomorrow, is the International Day for Children. So they are hosting an event featuring voices of children from Gaza. So they'll be on the call talking about this. So I'll send the link if you would like to register for the session. It's happening tomorrow. Let me check the time. I think 12 p.m. Eastern. So that's 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. in Palestine. So I'll just send the link right there. Ubai mentioned the no fuel for genocide, and I believe that has been on Kumi now .com/action. So I'll also send the link to Kumi now action page if you want to look at the No Fuel for Genocide campaign. And then if anyone has updates in terms of the, I remember some Congress bills that were trying to be pushed through, and then other things that are happening in your community, feel free to share. And we can have the space in terms of, because I think we have more time than usual today, so we can have a conversation as well. Randy, you may unmute, or I think you're unmuted.
Hi, Dan. Thanks so much. I just wanted to remind people that they should be, at least here in the US, that they should be contacting their representatives in Congress. This week, the bill that was previously defeated last week in the House is reappearing. It's HR 9495, which would give the Secretary of the Treasury almost unlimited power to be able to identify or to name organizations that are in solidarity with Palestinians as supporting terror, not a terrorist organization, but supporting terror. And they would be in danger of losing their their tax exempt status. And this was previously defeated because it was brought forward under special rules that required a 2/3 majority. It almost achieved that, but was defeated, and now they're bringing it back this week under regular rules where it only needs 50% plus one. So please, if you know that your representative already opposed this bill last time, please write and thank them for that and ask them to continue that opposition. If they voted for or did not vote in the last time, please encourage them to vote no on this. Also on the Senate side, Senator Bernie Sanders and a number of other senators have proposed some resolutions of disapproval that would disapprove of monies that have already been allocated to the Israeli government over the last number of months, but giving a sense of the Senate that they do not support that. So if you can, give your senators a call as well, or write to them and ask them to support Bernie Sanders and the other senators' resolutions of disapproval.
Thanks, Randy. I just sent a link that's from FOSNA. So you can actually use this to email them directly, your representatives on the HR 9495. This was for last week, so November 12th, but obviously you can adjust the email so it reflects today. So thank you, Randy. Mary Ann.
Yes, Randy, thank you so much for highlighting both bills. I want to stress and underline the fact that the Senate, it's called the 6 Senate Joint Resolutions 111 through 116. So it's 6 resolutions that come together as one, and it's going to block. This has never happened before in the history of the United States. No one has ever blocked the funding for Israel. $20 billion is at stake here. And so I urge us not just to send emails through FOSNA. I say, call your congressperson or your senators, both senators of your states, and call your friends to do the same. This is an opportunity that we've never had before. So I call it historic. My sister Ellen was arrested on Friday at Schumer's office in Syracuse, where the newly formed Berrigan Collective did an action to go into the lobby and announce, this demand that our senators support. Sanders, Merkley, I forgot the senator from Hawaii, and then the 4th person. And there's more senators that are piling on now because they're realizing, oh, this is the real deal. It's one of the rare opportunities that we have through a legislative push. So it's SJ Res 111 through 116, not 113, is my understanding anyway. All right, great.
Awesome. Sorry,
Thanks.
just taking notes while you're talking. So I just put,
Yeah.
I found the link to the bill, so you can check that. It was introduced by Senator Bernie Sanders, so you can do that and then make sure you call your representative. I think that's a great idea. And Jewish Voice for Peace, usually in their campaigns, I believe they're actually pushing this as well. You can probably go on their website and they have this automatic thing where if you put your location and everything, it will basically direct you to a call. So you can do that. So thank you, Mary Ann. Dorothy.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I would certainly underline the last 2 appeals. I have made those kinds of phone calls. My question is a different one. I would like to hear from you at Sabeel about the viability. Apparently, you are bringing delegations in regularly. I want to hear something about that because I have a group that was going to be coming several months ago, and we had to cancel at that time because of the airlines, but I think people are really nervous. How do I give people encouragement that it is indeed safe to come and do delegations?
So I'll send you a few links because some delegations have recently done some press conferences, so that might give you maybe more idea. And then you could send that also to your people so that they kind of have an idea that people are still visiting, they're visiting multiple communities. And so those press conferences will kind of go into detail about that and do some advocacy in those conferences. So I think that might be helpful for you. So I'll make sure to send that to you or at least put it in the group chat here. In terms of delegations, so we've been doing about one a month, and we're planning to do it for the next 2 to 3 years. So we're trying to make it as frequent as possible. And if anyone in this room wants to organize a delegation, just feel free to reach out to someone at Sabil and we can speak about it. Now, FOSNA, if you're doing it from the US or Canada, both FOSNA and Canadian Friends of Sabil have basically streamlined the process. So essentially, if you have like a group of people, you can give the names to us, and then Fasna will essentially take care of the process of logistical things. And so we have a Naim Atik fund, which has been trying to subsidize some of the trips, but we also do sometimes crowd fundraising. So Fasna will usually set up per person a fundraising page, and the community can essentially donate some money to help in terms of getting to Palestine. And in terms of the travel logistics, we usually go through Jordan because right now, obviously, the flights to Tel Aviv are canceled. And then also, it's a little harder usually in terms of security and there's much more, it's much difficult process basically trying to get through the Tel Aviv airport. So usually going through the Jordan border, it's time consuming, but it's much easier. So we've been doing this. And so again, like if you're interested in the logistics and you want Fasna to help basically arrange and set up all the pages for you, we can have a conversation about that. And so I'll put my email in the group chat just so if you and I know Dorothy, you might already have my email, but I'll just put it again, just for people to reach out to me if you have any questions about that. And I also just put the link to one recent press conference. So this was Blackface leaders. Actually, two of the people going was the daughter of the late Desmond Tutu and the granddaughter of Desmond Tutu. And they're actually planning to lead a few delegations in the next 2 years. So I believe they're opening the attendance for anyone who wants to go on their delegations. So I can put some information about that once she tells me a little bit more about the dates. And that can be something if you want to participate in Desmond Tutu's daughter's delegations. That would be something. Carol, you have your hand raised as well.
Yeah, so I want to echo everybody's encouragement to please call your senators and call your representatives about the House
Hello,
bill
everyone.
that could
Well,
have effects on basically all the nonprofits and we don't know what it will be used for in the Senate for blocking the weapons. In addition to that, so I'm part of Jewish Voice for Peace here in Charlotte. I put in the chat actions that Jewish Voice for Peace will be doing between Durham and Charlotte tomorrow. Basically, it's a calling out the senators for how they have been basically sending weapons to Israel and calling them out, saying, "Why are you not stopping these weapons?" And then also, it's just World Children's Day as well, so there's going to be things related to children focused and how are we not saving children. Um, Also, Jewish Voice for Peace will be doing partnering with other organizations in the Charlotte area on Saturday. So just all the details will be in the Instagram of JVP Charlotte there. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that JVP, in the southern states, went to the Jewish National Fund event in Dallas, and there were delegations from multiple states, and one of the delegations was from Charlotte, and two of my friends were arrested overnight because they basically were like in front of the entrance, I believe, to the hotel. And they were sitting on the ground, singing a song in Hebrew, not willing to move, and planting a tree. And they were arrested for planting a tree and singing in Hebrew. So, yeah. Um, yeah, and so I wanted to highlight that that should be on like online. You should be able to find these actions. Yeah, and I put the link to the Instagram in the chat.
Thanks, Carol. And I just saw the links. It's a little bit up there, so people can scroll up a little bit. And I hope your friends are who were arrested are okay now. Were they released?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, they
good.
were released like the next day. I think they were taken into custody or I'm not sure the dates, but at 4 p.m. and then like by 7 a.m. the next day they were released with bond. But hey, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the crackdown on protesters are going to be even worse in the next few years. So, yeah. And then Mary Ann, can you clarify a little bit about the question I saw in the chat? I think you're
Sorry.
muted.
Yeah, sorry. It takes me, I have to, anyway. So there are little details, moving parts, and it's a little awkward when I try to send emails to people. And I know you of Sabeel are, working so hard to coordinate all the different delegations that you have. So I'm just wondering if there's somebody on the ground here in the States with our time zone that could answer some questions.
It's Fasna. I believe Fasna has been doing some of the logistics, I believe.
All right, Jesse Wheeler.
Yeah, so Jesse, he might be a little busy, so I'll just make sure to email him if there's anyone else who is better at answering questions. John Noble is someone who's just got hired for Fasna, so he's been doing a lot of work with the delegations.
Yes,
So yeah.
I don't have John's number. I have Eli's and I have Jesse's signal numbers
Okay.
and Eli's phone number. I don't know whether people on this Kumi Now thing can be alerted to the use of signal. When I was trying to
Yeah.
send information, Google started coming up and saying, "Oh, we've got your coordinates and all that other stuff." So there's so much more surveillance going on now. And one heads up for anybody that is considering going on a delegation with Sabeel in the future, as of January 1st, Israel will be expecting us to apply for a visa online ahead of time. They're not going to just give you a visa at the border. That whole thing is changed now as of January 1st. So they will be vetting us as to who they'll let in and who not.
Yeah, so yeah, that is in 2025, I believe. I thought it was like earlier, but I think they moved it up a bit. So
yeah,
I think it might be useful maybe in the future, if anyone is interested in more of like a tech type of event in terms of like tech protection, especially with the crackdown. And Signal, like Mary Ann mentioned, it's an app that you can use. It's very secure. It's way more secure than WhatsApp or any other messaging app. So that's been something that a lot of people at Sabeel is using, and then we've been trying to use that to communicate with people. So if you're interested in just downloading the app, you can use your US number, but I think they also protect the number so you're not able to see other people's. And so that's been something that people have been using. I'll put mine down because if, for example, Jesse's not able to be reached, I can answer questions just from Sabeel's office and try to coordinate something there. So I'll
okay.
put my number
Can I
just
make
now.
Oh,
Yes.
great. Can I
Mhm.
make a footnote and just say that just recently, in the last week or so, I got the heads up that even Signal is no longer secure. And I would not be surprised knowing that Israel is, in the lead of the pack in terms of cracking into security or encrypted communications. So
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it is still more secure than WhatsApp, for sure.
absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Does anyone have any other updates? Feel free to raise your hand or you can put it in the chat.